Hi everyone, a very warm welcome to all of you, and also to our very dear Dinu and Michael for today's very special book launch. So my name is Dot, and I work at EC Contemporary as its curator, where UK's only non-profit art centre specialising in presenting and platforming artists and art practices that identify with and are informed by Southeast and Southeast Asian cultural backgrounds. So today we have this special publication launch of Dinu's exhibition publication titled Phantom's Five. It's an extended publication for his current solo show with us. And this publication delves into his multimedia practice, embracing DIY aesthetics and the Reggae visual tonality, to further amplify what he's been exploring in the exhibition about the hybridity in cultural identities. So the publication itself, which you can also see in our bookshelves and the tables over there, it features 4 essays and conversations contributed by author Sacha Craddock, McMillan, Wenny Teo, and Xiaowen Zhu. Each entry delves into various aspects of the artist's personal history and their crystallization into the tangible sculptural assemblages showcased at our space in the gallery. So a bit about our panel speakers today. As we know, he's today joined on site by our designer Michael Mason of the studio Cheval and the Easy Contemporary's director Xiaowen Zhu, who is also a contributing author of the publication. And the panel will collectively explore the distinctive visual narrative of the publication's design and delve into its key themes, such as how reggae music forges unprecedented cross-cultural kinships, relationships, loves, and communities, as well as how diasporic sentiments can subvert mainstream hegemonic categorisations. So, biographies of the 3 speakers. Dinu Li was born in Hong Kong and currently lives and works in Cornwall. He's an interdisciplinary artist working with moving image, photography, sculpture, assemblage, and performance. In his practice, he examines the manifestation of culture in the everyday, finding new meanings to the familiar, making visible the seemingly invisible. Archives play a very active role in his work, and they are often used as a point of departure for his projects. His methodology is research-based with an emphasis on appropriation and reconfiguration. This work is often characterized by problematizing the document as part of the modus operandi. And also as Michael Mason is a Canadian designer based in East London. Over the course of his career, he has held roles with branding and design agencies such as Character, Mammoth Machine, Mother Design, Pentagram, and Wink Creative. While leading projects for clients such as Apple, Atelier Editions, BBC, Google, Nike, Squarespace, and Space 10, and more recently, Michael has worked with the in-house team at Google Creative Lab and Apple. Michael is currently working as a freelance design director while running Studio Cheval, which is an independent graphic design practice based in Hackney of East London. And Xiaowen Zhu, who's our director, she has worked internationally in Shanghai, New York, Los Angeles, London, and Berlin as a director, author, and lecturer. She was previously assistant director at Times Art Center Berlin and has conceived exhibitions with established and emerging artists from all over the world. Zhu is the author of Oriental Silk and Encounters. She's a prolific speaker and has lectured about contemporary art and culture at universities around the world. She has been featured in the Apollo magazine's 2022 list of 40 under 40 Asia Pacific thinkers. So now we'll begin with a very lovely presentation of Dinu, followed by a second lovely presentation from Michael. So I'll hand over to Dinu now.
So hopefully everyone's been inside the gallery to have a look at the work. So today's slide presentation is to hopefully bring a little bit of context behind the work rather than speak about the work directly. So clearly the exhibition is centered around music, and I guess for a lot of us, music has a relationship to identity. For example, if you are a big fan of punk, that is your identity. If you're a big fan of Mozart, then that is your identity. So there's a relationship between the two. And as a child growing up in Hong Kong, and the music I was brought up with is classic Chinese opera music and performance. It's not to say that I understand Chinese opera, and but it's something that is an omnipresent. It surrounds lives in Hong Kong where I was brought up. So that would mean that families that play mahjong, there would be Chinese opera on TV in the background somewhere. So you're either going to a theatre house to watch it, or it might be played on the radio, or there would be some family activity, and it's just in the background. So it's an omnipresent. And I guess I'm particularly seduced by Chinese opera, in particular those characters who have the beard covering their mouth. And because in Chinese opera, it's every detail counts. The raising of the eyebrow, the last finger pointing, the elbow moving, the head rattling, they all suggest something, and I'm really intrigued. Why is it that there are some characters where the mouth is concealed? And the idea of expressing and concealment becomes something that I think about in my work, which is also something that Michael then used. As soon as you hold the publication, there will be an idea of things being revealed and concealed. It's present right in front of you. And but amongst the Chinese opera that is omnipresent, then because I was brought up in a working class context, and actually we didn't have a TV at home, and so for us to be entertained, there was a street in Hong Kong called Temple Street, and on Temple Street, you know it? Do you know it, Temple Street?
Yeah.
So on Temple Street there are these stalls where people are not selling things, but they're singing and they're performing, and they are there to entertain poor people who don't have money to have a TV. So as a kid growing up, I was going onto Temple Street at night time to watch these people perform, and we would bring our own chairs from home and we would just sit there. And Temple Street's about 20 minutes walk away from my home, so I would take my stool and go there and just watch that all night long. And then later on in my life, I was really inspired by this movie. It's made by Chen Kaige, a Chinese filmmaker, who made, the film was released in 1984 called Yellow Earth. And the film is where Chen Kaige revisits, fictionally revisits a particular history in China in 1939. So the story is set in 39, exactly 10 years before China was liberated. So the liberation is where Mao Zedong had that huge civil war between the communists and nationalists. And 49 is where Mao liberated China, but 10 years earlier is where this story begins. And the story is about one particular army officer who is sent by the Communist Party to go to the hinterlands of China to extract folk songs. He would then bring the folk songs back to the Communist Party so that they would use the song and rewrite the scripts of the song so that they could galvanize the larger communities so that everyone is united. And what is significant about this, and also about the publication that Michael then designed, is the fact that it's called Yellow Earth. And the colour yellow is, so Zhang Yimou was the cinematographer of the movie, and Zhang Yimou you will notice in all of Zhang Yibao's movies that he manipulates colours in very particular ways. And in this movie, he enhanced the yellow. And I'll talk a bit more later if Xiaowen will ask me about this yellow in relationship to the publication, because because the raw material that is also used by artists, ochre is present across the world, and it's really present in this movie, and it's definitely present. We're laughing because it kind of came by accident in a way, so we'll kind of disclose that later on. But it becomes really important. So after watching Yellow Earth, I decided for real that I would adopt this communist officer, where I myself went to the hinterlands of China, up mountains, to extract folk songs. So whereas Chen Kaige did it as a fictional thing, I just did it for real. I travelled into the remotest parts of China because I was definitely interested in folk songs, in the same way that the 1965 movie Maria, played by Julie Andrews, would be in the Austrian Alps with her arms stretched out singing The Sound of Music. I was really interested in that. I was very interested in, not me being a nun, but me finding out about these folk mountain songs in China. And I was specifically interested in this particular tribe called the Longhorn Miao, who have these ancestral hair. So basically, they have these wooden horns that stick out of their heads, and the ancestral hair is wrapped around the horn to give them this huge head. So there is this relationship between the opera beard and this ancestral hair, and lots of hair being seen in my exhibition. And what you've got is you've got these tribes who, they only sing one song, and it only lasts about 30 seconds. But the song is a calling, it's a love song where they sing across the mountain, and the song is reverbing, vibing, echoing, bouncing across the mountain to the valley as an invitation for the boys to go and find that voice the next day. And if they find that voice, then they're going to mate and become a couple. And this is a very particular day. It's the same day, it's the same tribe, but two different things are going on. So this is sort of 6 in the morning, and it's a funeral. And inside the wigwam, there's a coffin of someone who's passed away. So they're taking the hair, and each family are waiting their turn to pay the respects of that coffin. And the women are doing a circular motion around the coffin, and the men are blowing horns in an anti-clockwise motion. So there's 2 circles going on. And then sort of 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the same tribe but the young boys are at the valley of the mountain, but on top of a hotel. And they are roller skating in a circular motion. And in that particular moment, they are circulating to Earth, Wind and Fire's Boogie Wonderland song. So there are lots of circular motions going on, but to different kinds of music. And so you've got these folk songs, and then you've got this sort of urban 1970 black disco going on, and that becomes interesting to me. And then sort of what is the relationship between all of that stuff and the work I then made? So I was born in that sort of context on a rooftop shanty town, and this is exactly my home. The image on the right. and I shot it, I think in mid-1980s, and I vacated that space and emigrated to the UK, and then subsequent families would then move in there. But all those shanty towns are now erased, they're no longer there. So just to give you that context, but also the image on the left, the green netting is used both for building and for demolition. So you're not quite sure if you're looking at a building going up or you're seeing a building being collapsed. Either way, the green netting is there to avoid huge debris from going onto the street, and that netting is also present in the exhibition. So there is this idea of me connecting my work to the black cultural theorist, Stuart Hall. Stuart Hall has this theory where he discusses being and becoming. And that being and becoming is then translated by the Chicago black artist Theaster Gates, who then uses that theory and discusses place as something that's constantly at a point of becoming. Place is never a stagnant thing. Place is never at a point of full stop. Place is always a comma, and then it's going to something else. It's always transforming. So that netting becomes important to me. And as a kid, I would because of my context, I was never comfortable to be on the main streets, the main shopping streets, because of my working class background. I was always only really comfortable being on the back streets, but the back street became my playground. And at night time, I would be in these back streets and looking through closed shutters to watch people's TV and listen to music. And one night on the street, I heard this guy performing through the radio of a shutter. And I heard at the time what I thought was classic Chinese folk song. And I didn't know at the time, but later on I discovered actually the man is singing reggae, sung in Chinese. So that's Stephen Cheng. And the reason how I then later understood it's not a Chinese folk song, but actually a reggae, is that then later when I was 7 years old, I emigrated to the UK and moved to Sheffield for a year, and then emigrated, then moved to Manchester. In Manchester, my neighbourhood was Moss Side, Hume and Old Trafford. And at the time, Hume looked like this. And lots of black communities lived there. The Windrush generation would move there, and other communities, and also so it's kind of multicultural there. And by the time I was about 13, I would be going to blues parties. If you don't know what blues are, it's just basically what else I do? That's my mum. I have to answer my mum. Wait? Yeah. My mum's got dementia, and she's supposed to be ringing my sister, but she keeps ringing me. Yeah, that's okay. So by the time I was 13, I formed lots of friendships with the Jamaican community, and they would take me to these blues. Blues is basically where black communities were not welcomed into clubs in the city centre. So they created, and it's a shock, right? Because they make the best music. So DJs would play black music, but there was a time where black communities were not allowed into the clubs where their music was being played. Head scratch. So they made their own parties, and often the parties were going on in these areas. And And it's really architecturally interesting that the black communities made their own sound systems, huge speakers. And it just so happens that the sound systems take place at a crescent. If you have a crescent, the sound is going to be good, right? As opposed to a building that's flat. If it's a crescent, it's a really good sound. Everyone can hear it. And so in one of those parties I went to, I heard that song again. And that's when I was old enough by then to figure out, oh, Stephen Cheng is singing reggae, not Chinese folk song. And all the black dudes are skanking to his song. But that's when I got it, that this guy is being cool, not doing a folk song at all. And then when you look at my sculptures, you would be asking, how does it come about? And do you want to sit down here? Yeah? Thank you. Can you see? Can you see okay? Yes. Yes. Right, so because of my background, my working class background, then as much as I am influenced by artists exhibiting in gallery spaces, you know, I could be very inspired by Kusama and her polka dots. I could be very inspired by Oliver Eliasson and his mist. But amongst all the things I could be inspired by, I'm most inspired by the things that are going on in the street. So form and function, the things that we think about when we think about architecture. But I'm thinking about this kind of architecture. I'm thinking about things that just go on in the street. Things that you prefer not to go on. Like if you're in Bath, beautiful Bath, you'd rather not see this stuff go on. But they go on, don't they? They go on everywhere. And it's a kind of like an architecture. And kind of why I'm interested in these things is that form and function is something that is quite practical. You need the two for the building to be put up and for the building to be functioning well, but it has to have an aesthetic. And the thing that I'm struck by a lot is how the person is about to take out a flagstone, then they can go down. And for them to do that, they need to protect the public. And the pole is positioned in such a way, tucked casually underneath the plaque. And if it's not for the plaque, that pole will drop. So there's a form and there's a function about this workman going, let me just stick it underneath the plaque. Therefore, it's going to be fairly safe. But there is also this thing about serendipity, which goes on a lot in our publication. Serendipity is this kind of happy accident. And there's a happy accident that happens by the black box. The distance between the black box and where the work person is positioning the pole allows that tape to be drooping. If the tape is not drooping, it's not going to create a poetic movement by degrees because there's too much tension. And this is serendipity because the person has just casually done this thing. But the casualness allows poetry to happen when the summer breeze is blowing against the tape and the tape is making this movement. It's a beautiful little gesture, and they're the kind of things that I notice. So things like this, things that you'd rather not see, stops me on my tracks, and I'm staring at it, and I'm thinking, why is this not at the tape? You know, why is that not at the tape? It's perfect. It's a perfect form and function. It works. It's so practical. You're kind of thinking that. So these hotel cleaners, they've only got a set amount of time to get every room cleaned before people move in at 3 p.m. Right? So if you're a tourist and you are booked into Travelodge, 3 p.m. you're allowed to go in the room. So the cleaners have until 3 to sort everything out. So you're kind of thinking that trolley before the white towels, the dirty white towels, before the dirty white towels is packed in the trolley, the cleaners, this is Hong Kong, so the cleaners have mopped the floor. But they then need the mop to be dry, so they're hanging it on the trolley to allow the mop to be dry before the towels show up. So there's something very practical, there's something very formal and functional about what they do, and they're the things that I'm most seduced by. That is just a Tate modern thing that they should just go and collect right now. If they don't collect that, they've made a huge mistake. It's so smart to have that breeze block on the two wooden blocks on the floor. That is so smart. Without the two wooden blocks, it won't work. It's not going to hold up the steel poles at the top. But the arrangement of those tapes, the geometric lines, it's so aesthetic. And so when I came into this space, it was an empty space, and it's always terribly stressful as an artist. You go into a gallery and it's completely blank. What are you going to do? And it's terrifying. Same thing when you've got a blank screen, right?
Oh yeah, 100%.
Terrifying.
White sheet.
So those things then became important about my tape drooping, because there's air-con in the room, and the air-con allows my tape to be moving. So archives as active agents, archives play a huge role in my practice. I look at archives all day long, all of the time, and I'm just going to flick through these. So you've got this man, he's tied up. You see ropes a lot in my exhibition. You see this German naval officer with his rifle, and you see ropes, and you see indentured workers about to embark on a voyage around the world. So basically what you've got is you've got a boxer revolutionary who's attempting to repel the invaders, and he's captured and he's being roped. You've got the alliance, so you've got the Western alliance who are in China collecting human beings for them to be enslaved, and then you've got the people on the voyage, and there's ropes all around, hence the ropes. That's omnipresent in my work, and that's why the archives become important. They're my resource for me to go and make work. And then you've got the indentured worker actually arriving at the final destination, doing what they are supposed to be doing. So you've got the beginning of the struggle, you've got the captors, and you've got the captured, and then you've got them doing things. And then when they're doing things in a Jamaican context, they are then coming into contact with locals, and the locals are doing music. And something happens between the two, and much, much, much later on, when the emergence of the Windrush in UK and their impact on urban black music. And if you go to Notting Hill Carnival and you're looking at these huge sound systems, you see ropes again, because ropes is what ties these sound systems together so they can be lifted from the truck straight onto the street. So it's like an omnipresent. And then those feathers that you see in my work in Chinese opera is then repeated in the Notting Hill Carnival. So there are these kind of relationships. My relationship, my background with the black community, Stephen Cheng music, and I think I've gone on for my 20 minutes. So.
Oh no, that's great.
That's it for my part, I think. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Oh, one more thing. Yeah. So what's that got to do with my sound system? Sonic vibrations when sound pushes air. Okay. So Hume when I was a kid, and the Hume that you know, yeah, you don't know that Hume, that Hume I know. This is Hume now. So why is my sound system looking the way that it looks? Because sound systems require the cabinet, the box, the wooden box, for the bass to be reverbing, echoing, and vibing, for you to feel the bass. But my sound system is stripped back. That is my way of describing a particular history. That Stuart Hall talks about being and becoming, and Theaster Gates saying that place is always at a point of becoming. If there's no full stop, and life is a constant commerce, there is not a full stop thing, then I'm very curious about the sound of that reggae I heard when I was a kid, and played in that space without. So I've gone to these scrapyards to pick up these speakers, climbing mountains of cars and stripping the speakers to make my sound system. So the system should look like that, but actually it looks like this. And this is where I'm relating my practice close to the theories about being and becoming. What's to become of that sound when that sound does not have the housing? When the sound is dispersed, when does that sound end? Or does sound simply move? Because bass requires, what bass does is bass moves air. That's why you feel the vibration of bass, because it's moving air. And so the air conditioning of the gallery, there's air circulating, and there's bare speakers with bass coming out. Then the bass coming out of the sound system is being moved by the air of the air conditioning, and my sound is moving out into the street. And where is it going to next? So that's the thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%.
Hope so. That's it, I think. Yeah. Yeah.
So, as Dinu mentioned, I worked on the publication design of the exhibition catalog, and I was just going to talk a little bit about kind of what design process entailed and how we kind of landed where we landed with the final publication. So we started off the project at 6 individual territories, which is essentially having some discussions with Dinu and kind of identifying some themes that we could tap into, and I guess themes that are both ever present within the work conceptually, but also themes that are translatable to graphic design, publication design, editorial design. So the first of those visual territories is this vernacular street market. So we went into a phase of doing some visual research around street markets in Hong Kong and seeing what kind of graphic language exists there that we could make reference to and draw inspiration from. And there's something so lovely about a lot of these signs that make up everything from kind of like the horizon line upwards in the street markets, which in the context of what you see at the top left is extremely busy and crazy and hard to consume. But when you isolate them individually, they're all quite memorable in their simplicity. They're always based on one or two or three colors, kind of restricting themselves to the methods of production and to keep them at a lower price point. So it's always kind of red and blue or red and white or something along these lines. And typographically, everything always feels like a little bit naive, a little bit off the shelf, kind of hand placed. They're all probably just printed from kind of local printers and things along these lines. And then there's also this visual language of newspapers, which we thought could be really interesting to be able to make reference to kind of like market stalls by ways of narrative, but also embrace it as like a form factor for the publication in itself. from the beginning. And beyond form factor in terms of graphic language, we thought it could be interesting to make reference to newsprint by ways of layout, embracing things like multiple columns, by ways of typography. A lot of the newspapers, they always kind of have these really narrow, tall characters. So are these kind of graphic languages that we could tap into. Of course, reggae culture is a very prevalent theme within the work. So we were looking at ways of introducing kind of the visual language and the universe of reggae culture and reggae design within publication as well from the get-go. So this was just an initial mood board that we were looking at the very beginning of the process. So can we draw a reference from the colors? How would those colors come into play? Could we draw a reference from kind of album artwork and poster work of the era? A lot of the typography looks quite similar to the typography within newspapers serendipitously, like the fact that they're all quite bold and kind of attention grabbing and simple and narrow. And then there's this other visual territory of liminal states. So this idea of, when he was talking about remembering this song from his past and recontextualizing it and having a deeper understanding of what that song actually is, what its cultural significance and history is, and detaching that from kind of like a floating memory of it. And we thought there was something really interesting in really embracing like the phantom within a phantom's vibe and trying to find ways of conveying that visually. So we're looking at some graphic devices that feel like they're kind of transitioning in and transitioning out, feeling like they're coming into focus. You can't quite grasp them, but maybe we could kind of communicate that narrative to start off in a place that isn't really legible, and then kind of carry the reader into a place of understanding, of clarity, of legibility. So we had those three kind of territories that we wanted to hang on to. And once we all kind of aligned on that, we moved forward with putting together some initial design directions. So we have two that we'll look at, and these are basically just the images that presented at the very beginning of the process. So the first direction was really embracing that idea of kind of liminal spaces, and we were playing around with this typographic approach where you could kind of, as you flip the pages, you move from this place of obscurity to this place of clarity. And we were doing so through this kind of moire texture, which is a sort of pattern that exists a lot in newsprint. So we thought that there was something quite interesting that you could kind of draw a line between that vernacular of newspapers as well as this idea of kind of the unknown. And we were playing with a few different visual treatments for that as to how we could convey that transition. So you can see a phantom's vibe at the bottom of the page. It's like blurry at the top, but then it's clear at the bottom. And we thought that could maybe be one way of kind of conveying a sense of liminal, like floating thoughts and coming to clarity, coming into understanding. We were looking at colors that tapped into that three colors of reggae. And then kind of translating that idea across various titles and content throughout the publication. Also seeing if we could take that idea of that kind of obscure moire newsprint pattern and translate it to the visuals as well. Is that a way that we could kind of tie everything together? Some more explorations there. You can see how we're really embracing those multiple columns. It feels a lot like a newspaper. And then the second direction, which is the one that we ended up moving forward with, which you'll see isn't like a million miles off to where we landed ultimately. But in this direction, we still embrace newsprint as a format. But to convey that idea of moving from obscurity into clarity, we use this semi-transparent envelope where you could partially obscure the title of the publication. The thinking being when you pull it out, that's when you're able to read through and interact with the idea in its full clarity. So we really love the idea that as you're opening up the publication, as you're diving into it, you're kind of going through the same narrative that Dinu went through in terms of like understanding and finding clarity within what that song is. And then we took that typographic approach and started to play around with the content, looking at how we could bring in those reggae colors into the design as well. We thought there was something really quite like arresting and graphic in approaching each kind of spread, a double page spread, in a single color whenever we're playing with text. So on one spread you'll have yellow, another spread you'll have green, another spread you'll have red. So then overall the overarching experience has this color narrative of reggae. And additionally, we were looking at how are ways that we can kind of treat photography as well, wherever appropriate, in these colorways as well. So we're just doing some tests early on in the various colors. And then once we all aligned on that, everyone was happy with the idea of kind of moving from obscurity into clarity by ways of that exterior envelope, but as well as the idea of holding on to the reggae colors and using that as our color system for typography. We started to lay out all the content and just a little bit of a sketch to all kind of understand where exactly, at what point in flipping through the publication would we come across the exhibition photography, at what point would we come across the various essays, how do we place it in a way that felt rhythmic, but also continuously engaging. And then here you could just start to see how we start to take a lot of those elements and play with the finalized copy and the finalized images and kind of just start to drop them into the grid. And as we continue to progress, everything starts to get a little bit more refined. Just kind of stress testing the system. Whenever you're doing publication design, it's like you'll always think about everything very systemically, always solving for kind of what are the key component parts, and then those component parts being like your color, your typography, what titles look like, etc., etc. And then you start to test them out with all the various bits of content that you have. So all the various titles of the essays, all your imagery and copy, and just kind of drop it into the layout to make sure that it works when you stress test it. So this was kind of just working through that process to see how it felt. Which ultimately led us to, and here actually we have some photo pages as well, some examples of what it looks like, a few photos on a page, as well as these more full page spreads, which ultimately led us to this, which is what we see set up in the back of the room. But now that everyone's aware of kind of those underlying themes, the underlying concepts, and background narrative behind the exhibition, how that kind of came into play. You can see that overarching form factor, we're looking at newsprint, taps into that idea of a newsstand, and typographically it uses type that feels a lot like that street market signage. It feels a lot like typography that you see within newspapers. But those three colors that again still feel a little bit like that street market aesthetic are the three colors of reggae music, which again kind of echoes throughout the rest of the publication. We ended up balancing out those really big bold titles with this serif typography at the bottom. Everything's quite narrow, again to really kind of feel like the narrow type that you see within newspapers generally. But we liked this kind of contrast that you get between the thick and the thins. And what, I believe this is the conversation between Xiaowen and Dinu, and we have a lot of kind of archival photography that exists within this space. So whereas all the exhibition photography is in full color, a lot of the archival references from various conversations are included in several colors as well, just so you could have a fully kind of green spread or a fully red spread, fully yellow spread. Also in the center we have pull-out poster within the center page fold, where we have photograph from the exhibition. And then some more examples here of one of the yellow spreads fitting low with Sacha Craddock. And you can see how some of the photography start to lay out within a page as well. In contrast to that full page spread, you have a lot of these more kind of scattered, playful layouts to break up the rhythm. And that's all.
So I would like to inform everyone, this publication doesn't only exist in the digital realm. Actually, we have them printed as physical copies. If you haven't already seen them presented on our bookshelf display, also we have them available by the front desk. They're actually available to purchase, and we have produced just very limited copies. And the first print run is only 50, because it's quite limited. So feel free to look at, there's a free sample if you'd like to flip through the pages later and really kind of engage with the publication. I would highly recommend it.
And I think that the main thing to bear in mind going into this is ensuring that you approach it in a way that feels quite like honest and authentic. We were really just kind of like aware from the very beginning that we weren't going to be able to print it in like high gloss, high definition, super crisp photography. So we came up with a lot of kind of opportunities to just embrace the fact that maybe single color is going to be the most arresting kind of approach to color if we're taking a format like this where we're working with kind of limited inks and things along these lines. But I also think that conceptually it's quite interesting, and especially today was actually the first day that I saw the exhibition in real life. Seeing the exhibition in real life and kind of like the makeshift quality of it, it really kind of resonated with all the conversations that we've had previously. And I think that, the fact that a newspaper is something that you see just kind of like on the sidewalk walking down the street was just very kind of conceptually and like vernacular-wise like relevant to the work. So yeah, I thought it was great.
Great, thanks so much for your reflection. I personally really enjoy working with this format, because I think it's almost unique at first, but then also extremely accessible. And then we added this element, of the sleeve, right? And it's actually hand printed on top of so Dinu's name in both English and Chinese. It's hand printed by a printmaker here in Manchester. So actually there have been like all sorts of layers, in terms of the design strategy, execution, as well as the technicality and also craftsmanship. So everything kind of combined, in the final product, and something we're very happy to share with you today. Next question is moving on to the topic of colors. I know it's one of Dinu's favorite topic. It really struck me when you talked about the film Yellow Earth. It's one of the first films I learned actually in film school. I went to a film and art school. So because Johnny was like the representative of the fifth generation Chinese filmmaker in China. So at the time, that aesthetic was completely striking and revolutionary, because that generation of filmmakers, they went to kind of the film academy under the communist regime, so it's not the kind of aesthetic they were educated, trained, to produce, but it was so expressive and very raw, and so I kind of wonder, could you elaborate a bit more on kind of yellow, the color yellow, yellow earth, from yellow earth, to the yellow color, exhibition as well as in the publication.
Okay, so by now you know that a lot of this is related to reggae, and there are three colours that represent reggae, and yellow is one of them. And so when we were designing, we were thinking about reggae a lot. But the yellow used is not the reggae yellow. Because reggae yellow is a sunshine, happy, bright, light yellow, and that one isn't. So I struggled with it for a while, and I was commenting on it a few times.
Yeah.
And but Michael will have design and practical reasons why it had to be that tone. But for me, it has to go beyond the practical design thing. For me, it has to resonate in different ways. Otherwise, I won't be satisfied. And for some time, I was really worried that this is not representing the reggae yellow, and we went back and forth a few times. But then at some point, I was really looking at the yellow that you chose, which is an ochre yellow. And ochre is what I said earlier, where in Chen Kaiger's movie, the army officer is in the hinterlands of China. And actually in real life, ochre was discovered as a useful thing in China 400,000 years ago, around the same time that elsewhere in the world. So human beings, when they first started to be creative, you see it in cave art, right? And cave art, in my mind, is kind of related to graffiti art, because it's out there in the street on the cave. But also the way it's done is like graffiti art. So it depends where that human being had been, whether they would use charcoal or ochre. The ones where they're close to ochre, what would happen is that they would put their hand on the surface of a rock, and they would put ochre into their mouth, and they crunch the ochre, and then that is street art, right? That's graffiti. Because they want to get a stencil of the hand onto the surface of that rock. And there's something very poetic about human beings, early human beings, having seen elephants swimming in a mud of ochre. And why would elephants do that? Because elephants had understood that ochre is good for them. So therefore, if human beings had put ochre in their mouth, it's going to be good for them. But also they make art out of it, street art, graffiti art, hand stencils. So there's something about ochre, earth, touching the surface of the rock, realizing that our lives is temporal against something that's very permanent, the rock, the mountain, the cave. There's something really poetic about that. And the poetry is what I need, otherwise if it's purely about design and purely about overcoming things, which I think you're going to talk about, the things that you need to overcome with the QR code.
Oh, sure, yeah.
It has to go beyond that for me, and then once I recognise, oh, this is like the earliest pigment that was used in art. That's when I thought, wow, yeah, this is the choice. Yeah.
Yeah, we were butting heads a little bit from the beginning of that. But yeah, I guess at the end of the day, it's like when I mean, it sounds very boring, but it's like production constraints of ensuring that the yellow that you use is legible and that the QR code would be scannable was kind of what kicked off that conversation. But ultimately, I think we landed in a place that ticked off all the boxes in terms of like functionality, conveying the ideas of reggae and having this kind of conceptual and poetic backstory that resonated with your approach as well.
Thank you both so much. The next one is a different topic. I've been trying to kind of form some thoughts around the idea of places, but also, all those things you mentioned. Something exists on the street, but you kind of wish they don't, right? That kind of makes me think of street engineering, but like kind of in a very practical sense, because obviously it's also a reflection of people's being, in those places at a particular time. And very often, the references we're looking at, they're from the working class, they're from people on the street, especially the kind of jobs you mentioned, such as like hotel, cleaners, or people doing those construction workers. It just makes me think that, a lot of them, they might be migrant workers. It's more likely they are not contracted. They don't receive social benefits, pensions, all of those things, which you would think, kind of, especially I guess also we're sitting in this very beautiful gallery space, right? And it also makes me think about accessibility, to art in our everyday life and also in our society. So, and also, in your talk, you mentioned so many places, right? And among those places, there's not always a very immediate connection that we can draw from. I think the more obvious connections are, like, for example, from Hong Kong to the UK to Manchester. Especially nowadays we have like a surge, of migration from Hong Kong to Manchester, but that's more recent. But then, there are all these other places you mentioned, like also like in different continents, right? And then in different countries, in different places, and some are very, very specific, connected to personal or community memories. What would be your strategy or advice, for audience to make sense of all of those places? Yeah, and also like what people make out of their, everyday situation and also circumstances, kind of basically try to make things work, right? But then very often there's value in the way of them making things work, but very often they're neglected, invisible, or not, I guess in a way recognized. But it seems to me all of those invisible and unrecognized things are so critical to your work.
I think if you live in a place like Manchester, you can't avoid it, right? We're a diverse community here, and there's no point being blinkered about the time that we live in today, where you go there, you can get a curry, you go there, you can get a Mexican wrap, you go over there, you get some dim sum. My mum's neighbourhood, just the neighbourhood where my mum lives, if I go out onto the street with one potato and I knock on 15 doors, I'll get 15 different recipes of how to do a potato dish. Every single one different, and none of them is about chips or mashed potato. It's like international. So when you're in this sort of multicultural dynamic, there is no point of being blinkered and think about Brexit and moving people out of the way. People have just migrated, and people migrate for lots of different reasons. Sometimes it's about love that they migrate. Sometimes it's about economics. Sometimes it's about war. It's about lots of different things, and people come together. There is no point about a singularity. The point is about it's a multi-complex thing, and the multi-complex things is what's interesting. It's what makes us who we are, and so it's just about noticing those things and those sculptural forms that I'm seduced by. Is exactly that reason. It's about breaking down the hierarchy, and therefore it wasn't an accident before when I spoke about as much as I am seduced by Oliver Edison's mist, I'm also seduced by exactly the things that are going on in the street and how people go about doing their things in a way that for me is striking.
That was very beautiful. And then coming back to Michael, because you also come from a very multicultural background, do you feel like in a way kind of informs you to be like open to like artist ideas, like gallery ideas? Sometimes they might come across as quite, I guess, special, like requests or, like concerns and all those nuanced kind of like details.
Okay. I guess so. In a way, like, so I'm originally from Canada. My mom is from the Philippines. My dad is from the UK. But I feel as if that's, at least in my generation, it's like that is such a familiar narrative in Canada. It's like everyone's parents are immigrants. Like that is like the normal thing. So I feel as if kind of approaching everything just like culturally from like a place of like honest ignorance is just kind of like my default, I guess. But then also I'd say that like when it comes to like design, that's what makes design interesting for me as well. It's like I'm always interacting with people from very different backgrounds, with very different kind of views on life and objectives and things that they want to communicate. And it's kind of like my role to help try to facilitate that communication in a way that's like focused with poetry and narrative. I'm just rambling a little bit, but yeah, I guess like to an extent, yeah, for sure.
Thank you. I guess those are my questions. I would be very curious to hear any questions from our audience. Maybe you haven't seen the publication, feel free to explore the sample over there. But if you're already seeing the exhibition, and also just from the presentation and also conversation we just had, if you have any questions or comments or feedback you would like to share, you want to welcome to share with us.
Yes, one for Vivian. When you say that you identify with Reggae, it just microphones on wheels, I guess, as what you did when you were young. Now, has it changed?
Yeah, it's changed in that I'm less keen on new reggae. I've kind of remained faithful to sounds I heard as a kid. I mean, I don't just like reggae, I like all kinds of music. And but reggae was the thing. I guess reggae was the thing that I heard that I connected to first. I guess all the way back to when I assumed it was a Chinese folk song. So I connected to that song. And then it was just like I said about serendipity, about happy accidents, that I landed in the UK with living amongst a largely Jamaican community, and they introduced me. Well, they didn't just introduce me to reggae. They introduced me to, we're talking 13-year-old boys introducing me to jazz music. I mean, they were so fans. We're not talking any kind of jazz. We're not talking Miles Davis 1950s bebop. They were introducing me to 1970s Herbie Hancock jazz fusion. That is, for a 13-year-old, that's wild for them to go and listen to this. I mean, I couldn't handle it at 13, but I returned to it and I thought, wow, this is something. So yeah, I think it comes it does definitely come from an African perspective, the majority of the stuff I listen to.
What about today? Your music taste, how has it evolved?
I mean, I like most music. I think, I guess I find classics quite difficult. I guess it could be to do with my working class background. I guess classics is also to do with a lifestyle, and I find that very, very suffocating. I did a show in Switzerland in a private house. It's more like a soiree. So this man, he inherited his family's cheese empire. So the factory is also the palace where he lives. And in the basement, he turned it into a private gallery where he shows his friends things. So this guy worked in a private bank, and maybe there's only 100 people who banks at this bank. So no one I know. And the head of the bank told this guy, go and collect some art. So he created a collection for this bank. But the bank assumed that he might be collecting oil paintings, but he didn't. He collected fluorescent tubes and contemporary things. And the bank was thinking, what's he doing? But the collection became important, and then he built this huge basement gallery, and he invited me to show some work there, and that's where I finally was amongst his context. these sort of opera singers and people who do I definitely situate myself in street music. That's where I feel that's where I belong. It's what I understand.
I think you can have a question.
So I can see a lot of your work, and especially these exhibitions about what you're familiar with, what is at a close range, and what is your interaction with what's around. And there's also it's also informed by your personal experience and childhood, memory, and also background. But when you show your earlier works, the photos you took in rural, remote China, the photos are absolutely fascinating of these relatively young teenage girls and slightly younger, some older boys doing what they're doing. I'm just wondering how you negotiated as an artist at that time to observe and to also, in a sense, to participate in what they're doing, because I guess there's kind of an interface or the boundary between inside and outside. You know, you're also Chinese cultural heritage, but they are not ethnically Chinese, and there's this kind of Chineseness lurking in the background as identity and so forth. How you carry out that project?
In a literal sense, right? So I know about a lot of these ethnic minority groups in China. I've always been fascinated by what they wear and how they do their hair and what they signal when they do these things. So the visual part of their identity has always been a fascinating thing for me. But I was drawn to that group particularly, so I was just so concentrated that I have to go and meet them. And so in a literal sense, when I got there eventually, it took a long time. So the flight, then the train, then a local bus, then a horse-drawn cart, then climbing the mountains. And when I finally got to that particular tribe, then it was a conversation with the chief of that tribe. And when it was understood that I was very serious about making something of them, I didn't know what I was going to make. I just knew that I just wanted to spend some time. Then he offered his place for me to stay, and I stayed there for the first trip. I stayed there for 4 months. Then it didn't feel that I had got that far, so then I went 2 more times. So I went 3 times. Each time about 3-4 months each, and it was very difficult because it's a very different life, and everything's different, and you're exposed to things that you've never been exposed to before. So simple things like flu, staying in that tribe is a different kind of a flu, and I thought that's it. I'm not going to live. It just not. So I arrived, spoke to the person. The next day I had flu, and I was just slept for weeks in some stranger's hut who I've never met before. I was not awake for weeks. That's a really unique thing, to be sleeping on someone's bed who I've never met before. Like literally just lying there and able to do things. And can I tell you this very, very funny story about that? So they were going to sell their ox, the chief, because he didn't have any money. And to go to the market town from where he lived is like a 4-hour up and down the mountain to this other place. So we set off with this ox to cross this mountain. We set off about 3 in the morning. And sort of 8 people were either pulling or pushing this ox up and down, pitch black. We got to that market town with the ox, and the chief then felt bad about selling the ox. So we kind of
8 hours back to the art. It was, I lived, not as a tourist, I lived the life at the time. I wasn't really sure what I was doing there. I was just fascinated by them. Really fascinated by the song. That was a big thing, the hair and the song. And I think that's the thing that I brought to the show. In fact, when I made the work, I didn't know what to do with the work. Those photographs, I didn't know what to do with them. So no one's exhibited that stuff until now. So it's almost like those two photographs become, and the song becomes the premiere here. I've just had the stuff all these years, not knowing what I would do with it.
Did you actually have a shared language with them? Did you have
Hands, fingers, couple of sounds, yeah. Just like, yeah, very primitive way of communicating. Yeah, completely different. I just learned about, would you like to eat noodles? And in their dialect is nanulo, which is, would you like some noodles? I didn't understand anything else.
Which year was
Millennium. I was also very interested, I was interested in the hair, in the costume, the song. I was also interested to know, are ethnic minority groups able to hold on to identities in today's sort of digital AI era that we're living in? You know, do they hold on to anything? And clearly the kids who are dancing to Earth and Fire, they're going to go on to a different kind of identity, but the people who keep the hair, that's what they're doing. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think we have time for like 1 or 2 more questions. If there's any more questions.
Yeah. So thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for. I mean, I'm not sure because I haven't seen the show yet. So, you have actually you live in many different contexts, in 2 different concepts. You know, because you grew up in China, you know, with a very peculiar kind of architecture, and then you moved to the UK, another very peculiar architecture, because I mean the Russians, you know, which is doesn't exist anymore. It was a very peculiar, you know, I don't know how can I say in English, you know, and it created, you know, a different way to interact with people, you know, packed into this big building, etc. So, how much architecture has influenced your work?
I think it's a massive impact, because architecture architecture makes you think about space. It makes you think about place. It makes you think about what is the difference between place and space. I'm talking about. So I did an action recently. I was invited to do an action, and I decided to do my action inside a lift, where you're quite confined. And the thing about architecture and place and space is that confined and squeezed in also depends on context. So close proximity in Asia is not a deal, because that's how you live. So you're constantly close to people that you've never met before. But in Manchester it becomes a thing, doesn't it? It becomes oh. So it just depends. It depends. I was brought up in a shanty town, so close to someone, well that's just how it is. So packed underground London tube. It's neither here nor there when you've been packed like a sardine in Asia. So yeah, it plays in my mind when I make work. So the arrangement that you haven't seen, some of the things are arranged in a way that feels a little bit compact, and then other situations there's a bit more distance.
Because I mean, just so very, very quickly, you know, but also the kind of installation, you know, street installation, casual installation,
Yeah.
show us. They served for an architect. So there is always this kind of connection with an architecture somehow. And they are an architecture itself, of course, but at the same time they serve for something,
Yeah. And that's the thing about architecture, isn't it? The form and function.
Exactly.
It has to serve a function, not pure aesthetics. And that's the thing about the Barbican, for example, in London. The three young architects that form the collective that went on to build the Barbican, although they were steered by the architectural direction of form and function, often it did not function. Because when you're at the Barbican, you're often lost. You don't know how to get. You don't know
very well.
So right.
Yeah.
So does it function or has it failed? I mean, it's a beautiful thing. I love the Barbican, but for some people, they're trying to only spend an hour there before they want to leave. I can spend a whole day there, but some people just want to go in and go out, and they can't because they don't know how to get out. So yeah.
Well, thank you so much for spending this afternoon with us. I believe if you are interested in purchasing the publication, you will most likely be available to sign. I hope.
You're going to cost a lot of designs, no? Or more,
Yeah, maybe you can also write a poem. There are some lyrics also in the publication. And we also have the EP. Dinu, would you like to talk a bit about the EP?
So the EP was also the reason for me pushing to do the publication. Basically, the show should have happened many years ago, but some sort of political things that were going on here years ago, and also COVID, then knocked that date. And in the interim, between when it should have happened to the new team that then took it on, by that point, then the project became slightly bigger than I anticipated. And because of my enthusiasm for black music, then at some point when the team then got involved, at some point my sort of music community got bigger. I'm talking sort of Facebook international community, who then wanted to get involved in making more music than the original team had commissioned. And that music has to exist somehow. So it was just this thing where that Facebook group kept saying to me, "We want to make some stuff with you," and I just was constantly having to say to people, "I can't take it all because there's just too much." But there was one that I couldn't deny. There was one relationship with this guy called Keith West, who he came into the whole thing probably last, but was a very crucial relationship. So he Facebooked and said, "I'd like to do some reggae with you." So I checked him out and also asked him, and then realised that his godfather and his father created the Notting Hill Carnival procession. So without the dad and the godfather, we won't know if the Notting Hill procession would ever be a thing. So yeah, of course I want to work with you. and the tracks that he produced, so he's based in Australia and I'm in Cornwall, so we were producing the music online, so we're looking at each other on the screen. And I've got my mobile phone to record myself toasting. So toasting is something I have not done since I was 14. So trying to relearn how to be a Queen Street kid, and toasting on the mobile phone was a little bit embarrassing, but I think I pulled it off. So yeah. So they're on QR codes that you can then scan from the newspaper. And just the final thing about the center spread, which is that poster, that's just an extra little thing about aesthetics, about things that we put on a wall that that normally requires a very expensive, beautiful wooden frame. But my poster you can just stick with blue tack, so that goes back to that street sort of lo-fi aesthetics.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all for coming.